Welcome to A Fine Time, The Nanny Revisited. This is a podcast about The Nanny, where we recap each episode and then discuss, sharing our own unique take on each episode. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Debbie.
Thank you to everyone who listened to our first episode. We're really touched that you took the time to listen, to give us such positive feedback, and to continue this journey with us.
Today, we are talking about episode 2, Smoke Gets in Your Lies. As you know from our first episode, we like to start with a brief summary of the plot. 2 weeks after starting as the Sheffield's nanny, Fran's best friend Val comes to the Manhattan mansion. Brighton torments his sister Maggie about a pimple, resulting in Gracie shouting, "We hate you both." To put his bad behavior into perspective, Fran and Val reference the boys they went to school with, namely bad Lenny Brown, who had a smoker's cough in the 4th grade. Brighton takes inspiration from the story and is caught smoking at school. When Fran goes to tell Maxwell, Brighton blackmails her into silence, since, after all, he got the smoking idea from her. Maxwell takes a break from trying to find a composer for the musical he is opening in 8 weeks to take the family to a carnival at Brighton school. Before the family goes, Fran tells Maxwell, prompting a disagreement. Fran follows Maxwell to the theater to continue the discussion, and Maxwell realizes that Brighton has connected with Fran, unlike everyone other than his late mother. As punishment for smoking, Fran and Maxwell take Brighton to Grandma Yetta's retirement home, where he meets Ethel, phlegm in a hairnet, and he promises to never smoke again. Bernadette, is there anything you want to add to my summary?
I would just add that Fran did attempt to tell Maxwell, albeit in a kind of, you know, slow way
Fair.
about it. But because she was worried about the evil eye,
A little bit. Yes.
but she kind of Maxwell didn't really listen at that time. So there was an attempt. She did not successfully tell him, but she
True.
did try.
And as both Maxwell and Cece point out, what's the point of having a nanny if she can't handle things herself?
Yep.
So in this episode, we meet for the first time Grandma Yetta. What is your first impression of her?
Oh my goodness. I think I literally laughed out loud because she was just in the nursing home with those bottle thick glasses.
Yep.
With a cigarette dangling out of her mouth. She had like 2 purple barrettes like on either side.
Yep.
I could just tell this was going to be fun.
And what about her? I don't want to jump into our fashion discussion or our 90s nostalgia discussion, but what about her, I guess, tracksuit, for lack of better description?
Yeah, that was quintessential, like 90s. Like
yeah.
Colors. Yeah, that was pure 90s fashion right there.
Absolutely. So I personally kind of think that in this episode, which, as we said, is the first time we meet Grandma Yetta, they sort of lay it on a little thick with her character. And she softens in some regards, and in other regards, she sort of goes off the deep end as the series continues.
Interesting.
So just something to
keep an eye on.
Yeah. So before we jump into our different our shticks, there were some things I wanted to talk about in this episode. And the first thing is in the first real scene, you know, as Val's getting there, Fran makes a comment to Niles about how Val's her best friend and she wants her to drop dead. Val walks in and says, "I'm dropping dead." What did you think of that?
Well, yeah, I had kind of an impression from the first episode that was going to be one of the hallmarks of this series. Again, that kind of their verbal humor. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I had a feeling Val was going to say, "I'm dropping dead." Like I was not surprised that she showed up and said it. So
that's fair.
Same thing with when Fran later talking to Niles is like, "She has no class. Come on, Val, move your ass."
Yes, or
juxtapositions and stuff.
Correct. Another example, one that gets me every time, is when the family is having breakfast and Maxwell, says that it was your idea to go to the carnival. And she says, I wasn't feeling 100% that day. I think I was ovulating, and Niles puts the eggs down in front of Maxwell and says, "Your eggs, sir."
Yeah, I wrote that down. I was definitely wanting to bring that up as well. Yeah, that kind of comedic, um, timing and the using the different words and stuff to do that. It's
I
it's hilarious.
it's a hallmark, as you put it. I mean, this is something we're going to see in basically every episode.
Hmm.
Um, I guess what I wanted to talk more about with that scene is, to me, it is very representative of some aspects of female friendship, right? And it sort of reminded me of kind of the rivalry in the Neapolitan novels. I don't know if you've read those yet or if you're planning to, but they're by Elena Ferrante and they were very popular a few years ago, I think. And it's all about this friendship that goes through these women's lives. And there are times where, they share everything. There are times where they hide things, but there's also a level of competitiveness there.
Hmm.
And I just thought it was amusing.
Yeah, I've never read those books. I might need to look into that. But yeah, there's you can tell, but it's also like not necessarily a malicious kind of competition or anything, because Val's, readily admits I'm dropping dead.
Right.
She's not trying to one up Fran in that scene. So,
Oh, right. I mean, I'm not saying
oh yeah,
they're
no,
okay, cool.
yeah, no, I got it. I was just saying, you could tell that that's part of their friendship.
Yeah. Um, and then I also want to talk a little bit about Gracie on
Mm-hmm.
this episode. And she
Yeah.
has a number of just great one-off lines. You
Mm-hmm.
know, um, maybe daddy's seeing other children. And
Yes.
I'm not paranoid. Paranoid. Who said I was? Like,
The way she delivers it too. It's just
yes.
funny because she's
She
a little girl, and she's like, I dread puberty. I have combination skin.
right, or you're driving me towards a nervous breakdown or something like that. I think she says at the
Hmm.
very beginning. She
Yeah.
has so much depth for
Hmm.
such a small child, and
Hmm.
it's just so delightful.
Hmm.
I mean, as we saw in the first episode, she makes a comment, something like, "What is it? I'm very complex," or something
Hmm.
like that.
You don't, yeah, like you don't have any idea how complicated I am or
That's the
something.
line. Thank you.
Hmm.
Um, so let's also talk a little bit about Maggie and her catastrophizing over her, as Fran puts it, a little zit.
Hmm.
It Every time I watch a television show that has teenagers on it, I'm just like amazed by the things that they freak out over,
Hmm.
and how, you know, her little, like Maggie's little zit will be forgotten in 5 days,
Hmm.
right? But to her, she says, I think she makes a comment as Fran's about to drape her in the schmata to get her the facial or whatever.
Hmm.
That if this doesn't work, I'm going to kill myself, I think is what Maggie says.
Hmm.
And it's just so interesting how, as a teenager, everything is, a catastrophe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was talking with some of my friends the other day. I I keep a lot of stuff, so I still have like some notes and stuff from middle school. And looking back at it, I'm like laughing at how dramatic it's, what a big deal these certain things were at the time. That now, as an adult looking back, I'm like, oh, that was nothing. But um, I don't know if you've ever heard about the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows.
I have
Um,
not.
this
What
guy
is
like
it?
comes up with new words to express ideas and emotions that we don't currently have in English, but he actually uses etymology to try to create the words that would make sense.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And there was like he's done a couple of videos on YouTube representing some of those words. So if you've ever come across the word sonder, that's one of the words he's come up with. But I remember one of the videos or one of the entries, because he also has stuff online, um, was kind of pointing out that like when you're young, you don't have as much looking back. Everything feels slower, because you don't have all that time behind you to make it seem as small. So like everything seems to speed up as you get older because now you can reference back to those Christmases years ago. But when you're young, you've only had a handful, you know?
Right.
So, kind of along those lines, when you're younger, when you're a teenager, everything seems bigger to you because you're experiencing it for the first time. And there's also, I mean, I think it also ties in with Brighton as wanting to look cool. You know, that's why he ends up smoking. Um, I think when you're younger as well, you to some extent care more about how others view you. And for Maggie, you know, as it on your cheek is pretty visible to others. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
That's a really perceptive way to put it about Brighton as to why he wanted to look cool. In my mind, he was just doing it because he was trying to prove he was a bad kid. You know,
Hmm.
he was trying to, I don't want to say run Fran off like he tried in the first episode, but
Hmm.
I just took it as him acting out like middle child syndrome as Gracie diagnosed him in the last episode.
As
But
a
I think
middle
you're
child, I take offense to that.
sorry.
I'm just
Um, but I think you're right that I think what got him was the exchange with Fran when he asked about Lenny Brown. Was he
kidding.
cool? And they said, "Oh, the coolest."
Hmm. Hmm. And he
So
kind of got this look on his face where you knew exactly where this was heading, that he was
yeah,
going to get caught smoking.
yeah, I gotta say, I mean, I've seen these episodes innumerable times, so I couldn't tell you what my initial reaction was the first time I saw it, but I'm pretty certain I didn't pick up on that was where this was going. Of course,
Oh, really?
I, I mean, I probably saw this the first time a couple decades ago, like at least a decade ago.
Yeah.
Um, but I would also think that when I watched it for the first time, I probably didn't have the episode's title in front of me.
Oh, yeah.
So
The
that
title gives it away.
little bit, yeah.
And you get the reference, right? Or or no?
I don't know. I
So
don't
the
think so.
episode Okay. So the episode title is Smoke Gets in Your Lies. And there's a song called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. So it's a play off of that
Ah,
title. At least that's how I took it.
I figured it had to be a play off something. I didn't know what.
Hmm.
Um,
Pretty sure
on
it's
the
by the
note, oh, go ahead.
Flutters or something.
Oh,
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. It's
Um,
another song.
I was just gonna say on the note of Brighton being cool, or in your interpretation, or just being a pest, I guess, in my interpretation.
I think it could be a combo.
But so in Brighton being Brighton, what do you
Yes.
make of Maxwell's the threat of sending him to military school? And I guess Maxwell doesn't actually threaten it, but Brighton
Hmm.
says you can't tell him, otherwise he'll ship me off to military school.
And he's like, can our country really afford that?
True.
Yeah. I mean, what they've been really playing up also in this episode is again is the whole thing that Maxwell's not really involved with the children.
Correct.
And he again, when Fran first tries to tell him about what happened with Brighton, he's again has that exchange with her. Well, what are nannies for if you can't handle this? You know, he only asks, is he hurt? Is there any property damage? Is he missing? And if it's none of those, okay, it's up to you, Fran, to deal with it.
Right.
And so, I mean, again, earlier you already mentioned Gracie commenting, you know, maybe daddy is seeing other children. I think that's one of the themes is that he's not a very involved parent at this point.
No, he's
A
not.
lot of the responsibilities are placed, you know, on others. And so I can see, you know, where Brighton would think maybe that he would get sent off somewhere if it, you know, if he was bad enough. And you know, now that I'm talking out loud, part of Brighton acting up is probably also just trying to seek attention, because Brighton's one of the ones who often brings up how, you know, Maxwell's not very involved.
That's true. That's very true. I was actually thinking more. I guess what I wanted to ask was, what do you think of that as a threat? Like, I don't. My parents never once threatened to try to send me to boarding school or military school of any kind.
My parents didn't eat either, so I mean, I can't really relate in that respect. But I think if I think it's such a, oh, it's so mean in the sense that you don't want to deal with it, you know, with the
Hmm.
child, that you're just trying to get rid of the problem
Hmm.
instead of, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that that is the root of the threat. Like, Brighton, you're being such a troublemaker here. I'm going to send you to military school and they will deal with you.
Mm-hmm.
On the note of problems, I just need to point out that um, after Fran tries to tell Maxwell, it cuts to that scene of Fran in the kitchen smoking, and
Yep.
she makes the comment, I've got to learn to deal with my problems without a crutch. What's to eat?
Yep. Yep.
And I think that's something we touched on in our last episode about how coping with food is something we are going to see a lot of. And
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's very common. Um, so
Yeah.
also, I'll mention in that scene, Fran also says something along the lines of, well, that was my mother's voice that just crossed over, the Queensboro Bridge and flew out my mouth. And then Maxwell makes a similar comment about,
Yeah.
with they both actually, even before that, they both make a comparison. Well, if everybody else jumped off the Empire State Building or jumped off the London Bridge, and they both realize, oh my gosh, I'm quoting my parents.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more I realize I do that.
Uh-huh.
And it's sort of amusing and also sort of terrifying all at once.
Yeah, that you're becoming your parents.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Um, I, I'm thinking of a different line in a different episode in I think season 3, and I will keep the comment to myself. But I should make a note to come back to this, a couple years from now when we're there.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, there were a couple other things I wanted to I guess talk a little bit about. Brighton's relationship with Maggie.
Mm-hmm.
If you recall in the first episode, he was totally picking on her, saying that she has no personality. Um, the reason she doesn't date is because the boys have noticed her and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And
Mm-hmm.
it just their relationship to me seemed like a very stereotypical brother sister relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted
Yeah.
to comment on that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also telling that when Brighton's trying to tell her, oh, like you look pretty today or something, she's like, shut up. Because she knows that that's probably not sincere.
Correct. And nothing he said in that part of the scene was sincere at all.
Mm-hmm.
We did handwriting analysis in school today, and I learned I'm very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
It
Well,
amazed. Go ahead.
you know what? That just made me think. I think when Fran caught on and took it, tried to play along for a bit and then stole the piece of paper so that she could read it, he kind of had this look of, oh my gosh, what's happening? And I think that might have been a moment where he gained respect for her.
I think you're right. I'm also super impressed with Fran for totally seeing through him.
Yeah.
Um, back to the comment you made previously. I'm going through my notes. With the comedic timing,
Hmm.
where Fran says something along the lines of, "Well, anything I say goes in one ear, out the other." Maxwell walks in. I was thinking about what you said. It the comedic timing, as you put it, is just fantastic on this show. Um, I guess I also want to talk a little bit about um, a couple. I don't want to call them like gender things, but I can't think of a better heading. Um,
Hmm.
I've found it really refreshing, I guess, where Fran says to him, I can't talk to you right now. You're completely irrational.
Just a reversal on the
Exactly.
stereotype.
Exactly. Um, and then there's also the comment about, she says something to Maxwell about, you can't leave the house with things unresolved. That's why men die young. And he says, that's not, they die young because they want to, or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I found that hilarious.
Hmm. Well, and again, kind of I touched on this in our last episode, but I gotta give props to Fran for like she went to Maxwell at the theater to discuss things, right?
Yes.
She's not afraid to speak up. Well, aside when she was trying to avoid earlier getting fired, but I mean, she's not afraid necessarily to to be the one who kind of makes sure that the conversation's had.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something she does throughout the series, as you could imagine.
Like, she's not intimidated by him,
No.
despite his wealth and status.
And his good looks. Let's throw that in there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. One other, I guess, sort of gender reversal. It actually in that scene where Maxwell talks about the special relationship Brighton had with his mother,
Mm-hmm.
he describes it as he feared her.
Yep.
And that's not something you normally hear. I mean, the stereotype is wait until your father gets home.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sort of refreshing that Sarah had this relationship with Brighton.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. And I guess the last big thing I want to talk about is what do you think of the punishment for smoking that he has to go hang out at the retirement home and go meet Ethel, phlegm in a hairnet?
Well, again, it's kind of it's interesting. I mean, I'm glad we go there to see the grandma and stuff. I think there was, a lot of the and stop smoking kind of campaign was like trying to show consequences of what can happen
Mm-hmm.
if you do smoke and stuff. I didn't expect it to be as impactful as it was for him to promise he would never do it. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
It's just an interesting, like, I guess it never would occur to me that that is the appropriate punishment.
Exactly.
I don't know why. I mean, I guess that's why Fran goes and contacts the high priestess of punishment.
Yeah.
Um, I guess I'm not at that level. I wouldn't have come up with that.
Hmm.
And I guess, I mean, I have this note, like, would this be an appropriate punishment nowadays? And I think the answer is probably still yes.
On the
Um,
same hand, I don't know if it's really a punishment. I mean, I would hate to think that visiting older people's a punishment.
correct.
Does that make sense? Like,
Yes. Sorry.
so
Yes.
again, I think it's more showing potential consequences, the fear, instilling the fear in him that, hey, if you continue down this path, this is what can happen to you.
Correct. I
Because
will also, sorry, go ahead.
to say Fran, said, "Oh, fear," that's what she kind of hung. I think that was the driving force. Is just be like, this could happen to you. You could
That,
have phlegm in your hairnet.
that's fair. I will say, um, there at sort of not at the beginning of that scene, but somewhere in the middle of the scene, Fran tells Brighton to go stand over next to Grandma Yetta where the air is clear or something like that. And she's like coughing up a lung throughout the
Yep.
scene. And
Uh-huh.
all that coughing without a mask or covering her mouth has sort of this new shock value to me since
Uh-huh.
2020, which is sort of amusing,
Mm-hmm.
terrifying. Pick your adjective.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other parts of the show you want to talk about?
Are we doing our shtick still?
We can go into the shticks if you'd like.
Yeah, because some of them I think might be more related to that.
Perfect. Pick your poison. Where do you want to start?
Let's do the notable New Yorkers slash, guest stars,
Okay.
references to famous people, etc.
Excellent.
I mean, so the first one I really saw was the reference to Jackie O living down the street.
Yup. And the reference to John, who,
Uh-huh.
um, interestingly, he actually died in a plane crash in July of 1999.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, just wanted to mention that it was this month. So continue.
Oh. Oh, okay. Now here's the thing is that part of the pace of the show, it's pretty quick in terms of the banter. So I find myself sometimes struggling to write everything down that I want to as it's being said because it's just kind of very quick. So I'm sure I did not catch all the references. The other thing I will say is that some of the references are dated in that, like, I don't know. who that person is when she mentions them.
Fair, which is why afterwards I went and did some quick Googling to get a sense of who she was talking about.
Yeah, which is good. But other things that were references. Now, Lenny Brown was a reference to the song, Leroy Brown. She mentions James Dean, Jerry Lewis, um, Cindy Crawford.
Yep.
There's John Boy Walton. Um,
Did you know who John Boy Walton was, by the way?
um, I'm assuming it's from that show from like the 70s.
I had no idea. So, yeah,
Is that correct?
it's a character from the Waltons.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so I'm not that familiar with the Waltons, but I've heard the name John Boy before, so that's what I assumed. Um, Edward J. Robinson?
Edward G. Robinson.
Okay.
According to Wikipedia, he was a Romanian-born American actor from Hollywood's golden age. I didn't take copious notes on who all the nice people referenced were, but what I thought was interesting about him is he originally had a different name and he changed it. He was Jewish, as I mentioned. He was from Romania. He kept the G to stand for his original last name, which I don't remember. It might have been Gold. It was Gold something, I think.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Trying to see it because again, I didn't catch everybody. I'm assuming knows Rembrandt is a famous
Yep.
artist.
So before Rembrandt, there was a reference to Burt Bacharach, who is an American composer who will actually make an appearance in a later episode.
So, interesting.
Or at least there's a character named Mr. Burt Bacharach, and I assume it is him.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was also not necessarily a name drop, but there was when Brighton is confronted with the smoking, he said, "I didn't inhale."
Yep.
For our listeners who are a bit younger than us, that is a reference to Bill Clinton regarding his marijuana use.
And then Maxwell's like, "That's the most pathetically lame excuse I've ever heard."
Yep.
I
have two others.
Yeah. So this is the one, obviously, in the scene where Fran goes to talk with Maxwell about Brighton at the theater. There's an audition going on, and I'll let you discuss that one because I could tell it was someone famous, but I did not know who it was at the time.
That was Carol Channing. She is, my understanding is she is famous for her role as Dolly in Hello, Dolly. According to IMDb, she also guest starred on The Magic School Bus, the Addams Family TV series, and the Drew Carey Show, among many other film credits.
Wow.
What was particularly interesting, and you were totally right, she is super famous, is, I don't know if you caught this, but Maxwell, Cece compliments Maxwell for being, absolutely brutal or vicious or something, today. And he says that we need a Broadway star who's on, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but we need a Broadway star who is name recognition across America, like a household name or whatever. And Carol Channing's the one who walks out and is about to do the song that she is most famous for. And she only gets to do the first word or maybe the first two words before he says next. And that's why it's so funny that he's just like, nope, he literally just described her.
Yeah.
And he's not even letting her sing.
Yeah, and that's why I knew, despite not being able to recognize who it was, that it was someone obviously who fit that description.
Yes.
Because like I said, that seems to be the kind of humor in the show.
Correct. And I'll also just point out, because I think it's so funny, is as Fran is walking out or on stage and Miss Channing is walking off stage, she says, "He's tough, break a leg, his." And I thought that was great.
Yeah. So who was your last one that you had?
Rebecca de Mornay.
Okay.
And I didn't know who that was. I'm sorry. So I Googled her, and the first reference was the film The Hand That Rocks the Cradle.
Okay, that would make sense in the reference.
Yes. I I can't say that I've seen that film, but I read the Wikipedia page about it, and the reference then made a lot of sense.
So
So
for the listeners who may not have seen the episode, um, when Fran's talking with Maxwell, talking about the whole Brighton situation, she's like, "Oh, I'm the worst nanny." Well, except for maybe Rebecca de Monet. Is that how you?
Mornay, I
Okay,
think.
yeah, and so that makes sense then.
Yeah. Just as for comparison here, as we've already covered, Fran did not only she gave Brighton the idea to start smoking accidentally. She then didn't. She was not forthcoming with Maxwell about it, and then she eventually told him, and then admitted that it was her doing, or I guess her influence. It wasn't really her doing. For comparison purposes, the character in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, I won't go into the whole backstory, but she basically starts to try to, I don't want to say poison the family because that would imply that she's actively like giving them things that would kill them, but she is acting in a way to undermine the family and risking um it was just it was a very it sounded like a very dark film. So yeah. Did you catch anybody else?
Not that I could quickly write down.
Fair. You're right, they do a lot. The banter is very fast, and I mean it's part of, I say it's part of being in New York, but I think it's also just the way the show goes, that they just talk so fast. I guess let's jump into our favorite fashion. I will start. I love the plaid suit that Fran is wearing in the first scene.
Yeah, and I trying to visualize it because she also doesn't she later, or I might be thinking about that. So is it a plaid skirt with a black top?
So actually, she's wearing it in the first scene, and then in the scene in the kitchen where she's trying to give Maggie a facial. But it's a plaid skirt, and it's pink and yellow and gray, and it has a matching jacket, and then under the jacket is a pink short turtleneck, not a short sleeve turtleneck, but the turtleneck does not go all the way up to her, like where her head meets her neck, but it's like a shorter turtleneck, and then over that is a black vest.
Gotcha.
And so this is one of many, many times that we will see her wearing a vest. We actually see her wearing another vest later in this episode where she's wearing the very high-waisted jeans, the white shirt, and the red vest.
Yeah. Well, and what I noticed with that outfit with the red vest is at that time, Maxwell's also wearing the same colored red vest under his jacket.
I did not notice that.
I thought that was interesting. Because that's the scene in the living room where she's attempting to tell him, but he's just so busy trying to find a composer.
Right.
So I just thought that was interesting that, and I was kind of looking, and I think it's the same shade of red, or at least very similar.
I didn't notice that. Huh.
Yeah. So for me in this episode, I don't necessarily think I had like a favorite outfit. There were several different interesting outfits. Again, that seem very, like the vest outfit seems very 90s to me. But I do want to discuss an interesting outfit.
Sure.
Not necessarily one that I would ever wear, but in the scene where she goes to the theater, that jacket has so many tassels and colorful buttons all over it.
Yes, it does.
It's a very bold kind of statement jacket.
Yes, it is. But to be fair, most of her outfits are statement outfits.
Yeah.
Not to jump into our 90s nostalgia quite yet. Actually, I'll save this until we get there. I do want to mention that we talked about this last week, where in the first episode, Fran makes a comment of a simple "we dress for breakfast" would suffice. And you'll notice that when they were having breakfast, she is still wearing her fuzzy bathrobe.
Yep. I made note of that, and she has like pink fuzzy slippers, but she has a full face of makeup on.
Obviously.
Nice.
Obviously. If it's all right, I'm going to jump into our 90s nostalgia with a little bit of fashion. Cece's suit jacket. It's so long and it goes down like, I think it was like mid thigh or maybe like further than that. And I just looked at that and I was like, wow, that's so 90s.
Mm-hmm.
We've already talked about Yetta's tracksuit,
Mm-hmm.
which also seems super 90s. The high-waisted jeans to me, although I think they're having a comeback. I'm not sure. I'm not fashionable enough to know.
Same. But yeah, I think they're having, there are certain 90s kind of styles that are coming back or have been back for the last year or two that I'm not on, but like I recognize as, oh, that has some 90s influence. That
Excellent.
like velvet and stuff. Yeah.
I had no idea.
Mhm.
The last thing that to me was very 90s nostalgia, and I'll try not to comment on this every time I see it, but the very old looking cars in the at the very very beginning.
Mhm.
Um, they just don't look. They look like cars from the 90s or earlier.
Yep. Yeah. And like I said, I think in general, I've already kind of mentioned it, but some of the references,
Yes.
are more timely, back then, like Jackie O, John John. And then, um, like I said, I've heard of Carol Channing, but I couldn't recognize her, in 2021. So
Mhm.
those type of like the quick references they make are sometimes more in that time period.
Right. Although interestingly, I believe Carol Channing only died a few years ago.
Hmm. Well, and
So
again, like I said, I've heard of her, but I've never actually like really seen her, or
fair.
if I did, I wasn't aware it was her. So,
No, that's fair. Um, I do think that is a risk that you run into whenever you watch anything that isn't current.
hmm.
Um, and that's something that I think does date programs.
Hmm. Yes.
Um, I'm as as I've kind of said, a lot of like you, a lot of these references went over my head, and I just jotted down names. And I was like, I will Google them afterwards because
Right.
I'm not sure, or I have no idea.
Hmm.
Um, do you any other 90s nostalgia you want to talk about?
Oh, nothing comes to mind at the moment, so I think we can, unless you have something else.
I'm going to jump over to our Yiddish Cup.
Yep.
There were a number of things that were talked about. Some of them were defined on the show. I will start with the evil eye,
Hmm.
which, according to myjewishlearning.com, the evil eye, or ayin hara, is the idea that a person or supernatural being can bewitch or harm an individual merely by looking at them. What I thought was so interesting about the reference in The Nanny was that I think most of the times I've heard a reference to an evil eye is when it's is basically you're attracting the evil eye by showing something off or flaunting something, not
Hmm.
necessarily for doing something bad. I mean, it makes sense that if you withhold information like Fran did, someone would look at you with a stink eye or an
Hmm.
evil eye, right? But
Yeah.
I guess that's not how I've usually heard it referred to.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
so anyway, I thought that was interesting. The Bubba is an old
Hmm.
wives' tale, which is exactly what Fran calls it. Um,
Hmm.
Bubba, sorry, uh, Bubby. I don't know why I said Bubba because that's clearly wrong. Bubby means grandmother, but it's also often used as a term of affection, like bubbala. Um,
Hmm.
and then two types of food I will mention: Blintzes and Babka. A blintz is
Hmm.
very similar to a crepe, but it's you know, um, so it's like an uh, I Google like I've eaten blintzes. I like blintzes. Um, I like try to come up with a way to describe blintzes, and the simplest thing is to tell people Google it to see what it looks like. And then babka, it's a type of cake. So
Hmm.
those are the only things I caught that might need some commentary or explanation. Was there anything
Yeah.
I missed? Put me on the
Not that
hot
I'm
seat.
aware of, but speaking of the cake at the end, that last scene where Grandma is like, "Be careful, don't let them know that you have it, or else they're gonna want it." And then Maxwell, of course, says it too loudly, and
Yup.
everybody comes for it. They're elderly people, so they're not very fast, but they're coming for it, swarming, and he kind of throws the box.
Yeah. Uh,
Did you know that?
I did. And actually watching, so I watched the episode twice today in anticipation of our discussion. The second time I'm watching it, Fran actually tells him to toss it
Oh,
or
really?
something like that. I've never noticed that before.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, you know, toss it that way, let them get it.
Yeah, save yourself.
Exactly. Which is also kind of sad for poor Yetta, who says, "Save it for my room," you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
because she's clearly not going to get any of it.
Yeah.
I think that's everything we're supposed to talk about except for our episode rating. I'm going to let you go first this time since you made me go first last time.
Okay. I think I rated the last one a 4,
Correct.
and I think I actually enjoyed this episode more. So, I'll
Really?
give it a 5.
Huh.
Yeah,
Oh,
I was literally laughing out loud at certain points. And I
okay.
think there was more of a groove to it. Like you're not just setting up the series. I will note quickly too that in this episode, we do get the setting that I'm used to, like the living room and all of that looks how
Yes,
I remember it. So it's not the pilot episode.
correct. I'm glad you mentioned that. I should have put that in my notes, but I didn't.
Mhm. What
So
about you,
I'm amused that you rated it higher than the pilot.
Jeff?
So when I watched it again today, I was sort of worried that we weren't going to have enough to talk about. I'm giving it a 3,
Ooh, interesting.
which is probably, other than a few uh, exceptions that I can think of off the top of my head, I think that's probably going to be the lowest my ranking will be, my rating will be.
Hmm.
Um, I just I didn't think there was that much to talk about. Apparently, I was wrong since we've been talking.
Yeah.
Um, but it doesn't make me as warm and fuzzy as the pilot or
Mhm.
some of the episodes that are coming up soon. So
Mhm. Yeah, and when I'm assuming after we finish a season, we're gonna have kind of a season recap kind of thing. And when I see the other episodes, I think my ratings might change. It's just so difficult if you don't have the whole thing to compare it to to really give an accurate kind of thing. But I just know like I enjoyed watching this episode today. Um, because like I said, I literally laughed out loud at certain parts.
well, I'm so glad. But query: can we change our rating after the fact?
I mean,
Well,
we can make the rules, Debbie. So
okay, cool. Then
we'll discuss this another time.
dear listeners, we reserve the rights to change our ratings after we've seen every episode in the season or beyond. We appreciate your patience and your understanding. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all we have for you today. We hope you had a fine time with us as we revisited the nanny.
If you would like to reach us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Nanny Revisited. You can also send us an email at a fine time nanny revisited at gmail.com. Have a great week.